I don't remember exactly when the nights began to feel heavier, but I think it started after the funeral, when the house seemed too quiet and every corner felt strangely hollow. That was also the time when I brought home an old shortwave radio that had been left to me with the belongings of a distant relative, a man I barely recalled, someone who had spent his life collecting odd, forgotten objects. The radio didn't look valuable. Its metal casing was chipped, its tuning window cracked, and when I tried turning it on, nothing happened. No light, no hum, no response at all. It felt like a dead machine, something that had stopped speaking long before it reached me. For the first few days, I simply let it sit on my desk. There was something about it that kept drawing my eyes back, as if it held a story I hadn't heard yet, but I never touched it. It didn't work anyway. I assumed it never would. But everything changed on the fourth night. It was 12:17 a.m. when I woke up to a low vibration in the air. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but as I opened my eyes, the sound sharpened and filled the room with a strange electric pressure. That was when I realized the radio, the same one that refused to turn on, had somehow come to life. A soft, steady hum pulsed from it, as if something inside it had awakened after years of silence. The hum didn't stay the same. It shifted, fluctuating in a way that made me feel as though the radio was tuning itself without my touch. And then, through the static, a voice slowly pushed its way through. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably human, and it spoke my name with a clarity that froze me where I sat. It didn't sound like a stranger saying it. It sounded like someone who knew exactly who I was. My breath halted as the voice continued, asking me if I was listening. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The voice then gave a set of coordinates, numbers spoken calmly and deliberately, as though they were meant only for me. After that, it said a date that connected to a memory I had spent years trying to forget. And before I could fully grasp what I was hearing, the transmission cut off all at once, leaving behind only silence that felt far heavier than the sound itself. I sat there long after the room had gone quiet again, unable to move, unsure if I should fear what I heard or follow it. But deep down, something in that voice had struck me in a way I didn't yet understand. Because the more I replayed it in my mind, the more I realized why the voice sounded familiar. It sounded like my brother, the brother who disappeared years ago and was never found. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. The voice kept echoing in my mind, growing sharper each time I replayed it. I tried convincing myself it was just interference or some strange coincidence, but the more I tried to rationalize it, the more impossible that explanation felt. My brother had been missing for so long that the world had practically erased him, yet the voice on that dead radio carried his tone, his pauses, even the quiet seriousness he always had when he talked to me late at night. It was too precise to ignore. By morning, the radio looked just as lifeless as before. No lights, no sound, no sign it had ever turned on. I tried the switch again, but it didn't respond. The silence felt mocking, almost intentional. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say? That an inoperative radio spoke in my brother's voice at midnight? No one would believe that. I wasn't sure I believed it. But the coordinates wouldn't leave my mind. I wrote them down, trying to steady my hands as I copied each number. When I searched for the location, my heart tightened. The coordinates pointed to a place I already knew, a long abandoned train station just outside the town. It had been closed for decades, isolated and overgrown, a place no one had any reason to visit. But I had been there once before, a long time ago, on the same date the voice mentioned. The memory was faint but unsettling, buried under years of trying to forget. I didn't want to go alone, so I waited until evening, convincing myself that daylight would make the place feel less threatening. As the sun began to set, I packed a small flashlight and the page with the coordinates and headed toward the station. The air felt colder the closer I got, as though the landscape itself remembered something I didn't. When I finally reached the entrance, I stopped and stared at the rusted iron gates. They were half collapsed, consumed by vines, and the station behind them looked like a forgotten skeleton of metal and concrete. The moment I stepped inside, something shifted in the atmosphere. It wasn't a sound or movement, just a strange heaviness that settled on my shoulders, as though the place was acknowledging my presence. I walked slowly along the cracked platform, scanning the ground for anything unusual. Nothing stood out at first, just broken glass, old wrappers, and the scattered remains of time. But when I reached the far end of the station, I saw something that didn't belong. A small metal box was resting near a collapsed bench. It was covered in dust, but not as much as everything else around it, suggesting it hadn't been there for long. My pulse quickened as I knelt beside it. The box wasn't locked. When I opened it, a faint smell of damp paper rose out. Inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a journal. The moment I touched it, a chill spread through my fingers because I recognized the handwriting on the cover. It belonged to my brother. For a moment, I just stared at it, unable to breathe. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years, but it was unmistakable. The sharp angles, the small letters, and the way he always pressed too hard with the pen. My throat tightened as I flipped open the first page. The entries were dated months before he disappeared, and each one grew stranger the further I read. He wrote about voices he heard through the walls late at night, whispers that followed him even when he was outside. He wrote about unusual signals that appeared on his radio, messages that felt directed at him. And then the entries shifted into warnings. Warnings about places he shouldn't visit, people he shouldn't trust, and transmissions that only arrived after midnight. The last entry made my skin crawl. He wrote, "If the radio ever speaks again, follow the first message, but never stay past dawn." I closed the journal slowly, feeling as though someone was standing behind me, watching. The abandoned station suddenly felt much less empty. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching in ways that didn't match the fading light. I didn't stay to investigate further. I slipped the journal into my bag and walked quickly back toward the exit, trying not to look over my shoulder, even though every instinct screamed that I should. That night, I kept the radio in front of me, waiting to see if it would turn on again. Midnight passed. Nothing happened. I almost relaxed. But at exactly 12:17 a.m., the same minute as before, the radio clicked on with a soft static hiss. The hairs on my arms lifted as the same voice emerged, still faint, but clearer than the night before. It said, "Did you find it?"
The moment I heard that question, my entire body tensed. The voice didn't sound curious, it sounded expectant, as though it already knew I had gone to the station and read the journal. I stared at the radio, unsure if I should respond, unsure if it even made a difference. The voice waited a moment, then spoke again, this time with a faint urgency that hadn't been there before. "You weren't supposed to take long," it said. "You lost time." Those words unsettled me more than anything else that night. I hadn't lost time. I had gone to the station in the evening and returned before dark. But hearing it out loud planted a small, cold fear in my mind. What if I didn't remember everything? What if something had happened between those moments at the station, something my mind had chosen to erase? Before I could think further, the voice continued telling me that I needed to listen carefully to the next coordinates. My hands trembled as I grabbed a pen. The numbers flowed through the static slowly, cleanly, almost rhythmically, and I wrote them down without looking away from the radio. When the sequence ended, there was a pause, followed by a low whispering sound. At first it seemed like interference, but then I realized the whispering wasn't random. It sounded like multiple voices layered together, all saying something I couldn't quite decipher. The effect made my spine tighten with a deep, instinctive discomfort. And then, abruptly, the broadcast ended. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt heavier, as though the air itself had thickened. I looked down at the coordinates I had written and felt an immediate dread. They pointed to a forested area outside the town, a place people avoided, a place known more for stories than facts. I remembered passing it a few times as a child and feeling an unexplainable unease even then. If the train station held only remnants of the past, this location felt like something meant to be left untouched. Still, I knew I had to go. My brother's journal had mentioned transmissions leading him to places for reasons he couldn't understand. Now the same pattern was unfolding for me, and I couldn't ignore the possibility, however small, that following it might lead me to answers about what happened to him. I waited until morning before leaving. The forest was dense, and the trail leading into it was barely visible through the undergrowth. As I stepped inside, the world seemed to fall quieter. The wind that had followed me here suddenly disappeared. Even the birds seemed hesitant to break the stillness. The deeper I went, the stranger the atmosphere became. The forest seemed older than it should have been, as though it had been preserved from some forgotten time. The trees stood unnaturally tall and narrow, their bark darkened and cracked like dried skin. After nearly an hour of walking, I reached the spot marked by the coordinates. It was a small clearing with a circle of uneven stones arranged in a shape that didn't feel natural. At the center of the circle lay something half buried in the soil. I moved closer, brushing away the dirt slowly, and felt my breath catch when I recognized what it was. It was another radio. Not identical to mine, but similar enough that it made my skin prickle. This one was rusted to the core, its antenna snapped and twisted like a broken limb. It looked like it had been here for a long time, far longer than any object should survive in a place like this. I knelt in front of it, unsure whether to touch it, when I noticed something carved on the stones forming the circle. My brother's name. The letters were crude, carved with haste or desperation, but unmistakable. Seeing his name etched there made the forest feel suddenly suffocating. I stepped back, trying to steady my breathing, and that's when I heard it, a faint crackling sound behind me. I turned slowly, expecting an animal or maybe a branch snapping under its own weight, but instead I saw nothing. The forest was still, too still. The crackling sound came again, louder this time, and I realized with horror that it wasn't coming from around me. It was coming from the broken radio at my feet. The device, despite its shattered antenna and rusted body, was trying to turn on. The static grew harsher, more deliberate, until the distorted voice pushed through. It wasn't my brother's voice this time. It was deeper, almost mechanical, as though something was mimicking speech without understanding it. The voice said, "You're late." The words felt accusatory, almost threatening, and before I could react, the static escalated into a sharp, piercing tone that forced me to step back. The sound abruptly stopped, leaving behind an even heavier silence. I didn't wait for anything else. I turned and made my way out of the forest as quickly as I could, refusing to look back even when I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. When I reached the edge of the trees, finally, the air seemed to release its grip from me, and the distant sounds of the world returned. That night, back in my room, I placed my own radio in front of me, both terrified and desperate for answers. Midnight passed slowly, and so did the next minute. But right when the clock struck 12:17 a.m., I held my breath. The radio turned on instantly, as though it had been waiting for the exact moment. This time, the voice didn't greet me. It didn't ask questions. It simply said, "You shouldn't have gone there." The moment I heard those words, I felt a deep coldness settle inside my chest. The voice didn't sound angry or surprised. It sounded disappointed, almost resigned, as though I had broken a rule I never knew existed. I stared at the radio, my hands tense against the edge of the desk, unsure if I should speak or wait. Before I could decide, the voice continued, this time slower, as though choosing its words carefully. It said, "You woke them. The forest wasn't meant for you." My pulse quickened. The forest felt wrong, but I hadn't expected the radio to warn me about it afterwards, as though something there had reacted to my presence. I didn't understand what "them" meant. I didn't want to understand, not fully. But the tone suggested that whatever was in that forest wasn't human, and it certainly wasn't meant to be disturbed. I tried to calm myself and asked the voice what it wanted from me, though my voice came out barely above a whisper. For a moment, there was only static. Then, gradually, I heard breathing coming through the radio. Slow, steady breathing, close enough that it felt like someone was standing right beside me, exhaling directly into my ear. I pushed my chair back instinctively, but the breathing didn't stop. The voice finally answered, saying I needed to finish what my brother had started. I asked what that meant, but the response was a series of disjointed words, broken by interference. I leaned closer, straining to catch fragments. Some of the words sounded like warnings, others like commands, and some didn't sound like words at all. Whatever the transmission was, it felt unstable, as though something else was interfering with the signal. And then, abruptly, the voice sharpened, as if regaining clarity. "Do not return there," it said. "Not after what you woke." My skin crawled at the firmness of that sentence. I felt the urge to turn the radio off, but fear kept me frozen in place. Before I could move, the voice said something that made every muscle in my body tighten. "They heard you." I didn't understand what that meant until I became aware of a faint sound outside my window. It was so soft at first that I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened more closely, I realized it was rhythmic. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps on the gravel of the driveway. I held perfectly still, staring at the window, afraid to even breathe. The radio began to hiss with static again, as though it was reacting to the same sound I was hearing. The footsteps grew louder, getting closer to the house. I clutched the edge of the desk, trying to convince myself it was my imagination, but then the steps stopped directly beneath the window. The sudden silence felt suffocating. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, and for a moment I thought the world had gone completely still. The radio broke the silence with a faint whisper. "Don't look."
I froze. The urge to turn toward the window was overwhelming, but the voice held a weight that made me trust it in spite of the fear clawing at my throat. I kept my eyes fixed on the radio, but I could feel something, some presence standing just outside the thin pane of glass. The air around me grew colder, and the room felt smaller, as though the walls were closing in. Something tapped on the window. It wasn't a branch or debris. It was too precise, too intentional. 3 slow taps, evenly spaced. I shut my eyes tightly, my breath trembling, waiting for the sound to repeat. Instead, I heard the soft scrape of something sliding across the window pane, like a fingernail dragging along the glass. The radio suddenly clicked off on its own. The silence that followed was unbearable. I didn't move for several minutes, afraid that any noise would draw whatever stood outside closer. When I finally gathered enough courage to glance toward the window, I found nothing there. No shape, no shadow, no footsteps in the gravel, as though nothing had ever been there at all. But I knew better. The next morning, I saw the marks on the glass. 3 faint streaks, evenly spaced, made by something that had dragged along the surface. I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't ignore what the radio had said. Something in that forest had noticed me. Something that wasn't supposed to know I existed. That night, I sat in front of the radio again, waiting for it to turn on. I didn't want it to, but I needed answers more than I needed safety. Midnight passed in silence. So did the next minute. But right when the clock hit 12:17 a.m., the radio clicked on with a clarity I hadn't heard before. This time, my brother's voice spoke clearly with no distortion at all. He said, "You need to listen very carefully. They're coming back."
Hearing my brother's voice so clearly after all those years felt like a punch to the chest. It wasn't a distorted echo or a faint imitation anymore. It was him. His exact tone, the quiet urgency he always had when he was trying to protect me from something he didn't want to fully explain. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My mind struggled to accept the impossible truth. My brother, who had disappeared without a trace, was speaking to me through a radio that shouldn't even be functioning. Before I could form a response, he continued, telling me that I needed to stay away from the forest. His voice carried a tension that made my hands shake. He said the place wasn't just abandoned. It served as a boundary, one that separated our world from something older and far more aware than anyone realized. When I asked who they were, the radio buzzed with static, as though something was interfering with the transmission the moment the question formed. My brother spoke again, but this time his voice sounded strained, as if he was fighting to stay connected. He said, "They follow sound. They follow the changes, and you change something by stepping inside their boundary." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I didn't know what I had awakened or what my presence had triggered, but I remembered the feeling of being watched, the silence that swallowed the forest, and the sense that the trees weren't just growing, they were observing. My brother's voice faded momentarily before returning with soft urgency. "You have one chance. You need to understand what I was searching for before they find it first." My heart raced as I asked him what he meant. The static thickened again, rising and falling like a breathing pattern deep inside the radio's circuitry. Finally, the words formed clearly, and the moment I heard them, my entire body tensed. He said, "It's not the radio they want. It's what it connects to." He didn't explain further, but something in his tone suggested that whatever the radio was receiving didn't originate from anywhere on Earth. Not in any normal sense. The signal wasn't random. It wasn't mechanical. It was aware. It was reaching out purposely, choosing those who could hear it. And according to my brother's journal, he had been listening to these messages long before he disappeared. I tried to ask him where he was, desperate to know if he was alive, trapped, or something else entirely. But the moment I said his name, the radio let out a violent burst of static that made me flinch. Beneath the noise, I heard faint, overlapping whispers, as though multiple voices were suddenly trying to speak at once. They weren't forming words. They sounded like breaths layered over one another, growing louder and faster, building into something that felt wrong on a fundamental level. My brother's voice broke through the chaos long enough to say, "Don't talk, they can hear questions." The transmission cut sharply after that. The radio went silent so quickly that it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat there for a long time, the quiet scraping against my nerves like a blade. The house felt colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed deeper than usual. Every small noise made me turn my head, expecting to hear footsteps outside again. The next morning, I decided to go through my brother's journal more thoroughly. Until then, I had only skimmed through the entries, too overwhelmed to read every line. But now I needed answers more than hesitation. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A set of sketches on the back pages. They weren't artistic or detailed. They looked like frantic illustrations drawn in moments of panic. Some showed the forest, but distorted, with trees bending in impossible angles. Others depicted tall, thin figures without faces, hidden between the trunks. The most unsettling sketch was one that seemed to show a radio, but with something emerging from its speaker, something shaped like a hand made of shadow. I tried to convince myself that the drawings were just manifestations of fear, but the longer I looked at them, the more I sensed that they were based on something real. My brother had seen something he hadn't been able to put into words. Later that night, as I sat with the journal open in front of me, I heard a noise from the hallway. It was a soft, dragging sound, like someone sliding their hand along the wall while walking slowly. I froze, listening intently. The sound moved closer, inching toward my room. I held my breath and stared at the door, which was slightly ajar. Just before the sound reached the door, the radio clicked on by itself. My brother's voice emerged instantly, filled with a level of urgency I had never heard from him before. He said, "Don't open the door. Whatever you hear, don't respond to it." The dragging sound stopped right outside my room. Then, quietly, something on the other side knocked. 3 slow knocks, identical to the ones I had heard at the window. The radio hissed sharply, and my brother's voice returned, barely audible. They found the house. The knocks were soft, but they vibrated through the wood in a way that made my chest tighten. I didn't dare move. My brother's warning kept repeating in my head, becoming louder than my own heartbeat. I kept my eyes fixed on the radio while the silence outside the door stretched into something unbearable. The house, usually full of subtle nighttime creaks, felt unnaturally still, as if every object inside it was holding its breath with me. Another knock came, not louder, just more deliberate. It sounded less like someone asking to be let in, and more like something tracing the rhythm of a memory it didn't quite understand. The radio crackled, and my brother's voice returned, quieter than before, almost as if he was whispering into the very edges of the frequency. "Don't speak, don't move. They respond to motion." I tried to stay perfectly still, although the impulse to back away from the door was nearly overwhelming. The dragging noise resumed, this time moving slowly along the bottom of the doorframe, as though something outside was feeling for gaps, searching for a way in. The sound eventually stopped directly under the handle, and an icy dread filled my stomach. Then, softly, something on the other side mimicked my voice. "Let me in,"
Hearing my own voice from the hallway felt like a violation of reality. It didn't sound distorted or monstrous. It was perfect. The same tone, the same pace, even the same tremor I would have had if I were the one speaking. My jaw tightened as the radio hissed violently, almost in pain, before my brother managed to speak again. They don't understand meaning. They only copy sound. I swallowed hard and stared at the door. Whatever was out there didn't know what it was asking. It was only repeating what it had heard humans say, hoping one of those sounds would open something. The doorknob twitched slightly, moving with a delicate, almost curious motion. The air around me grew colder with every passing second. When the door didn't open, the voice outside changed its approach. It tried different tones: calm, questioning, even pleading. Each time it was still my voice. Sometimes it repeated words I hadn't spoken in years. Sometimes it whispered fragments that didn't belong to me at all. The effect was deeply disorienting, like listening to a dream speak. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the voice outside fell silent. The footsteps retreated slowly down the hallway, but they didn't sound like footsteps anymore. They were softer, irregular, as though whatever had come to the door was changing its shape as it moved away. I didn't open the door until sunrise, when the light finally softened the shadows and the house felt somewhat normal again. When I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something on the floor just outside my room. 3 faint, elongated marks running parallel to each other, as though something with long, narrow fingers had steadied itself there. I forced myself to step over them and walked to the living room. The curtains were drawn tightly shut, but the morning light seeped in through their edges. I reached for the curtain reluctantly and pulled it aside. Outside, the ground looked undisturbed. No unusual things, no footprints, no signs of a visitor. But when I looked closer, I saw impressions in the soil near the window. Not footprints, but deep, narrow indentations arranged in a pattern that didn't match any living creature I knew. That night, I tried to prepare myself. I kept the journal open beside me, hoping it would reveal something I had previously missed, some pattern, some message, anything that would help me understand what was happening. One entry caught my eye, one I must have skimmed over in my earlier panic. It described how my brother had first encountered them. He wrote that they existed in places where the world was thin, where boundaries between what was seen and unseen weakened. The radio, he said, didn't create the connection. It only revealed it. It was a key. Not to speak with the past, but to hear what lived just outside our understanding. The entry ended with a chilling realization. They don't see us until we listen, and once we listen, they follow the sound. At exactly 12:17 a.m., the radio turned on again. My breath caught in my chest as the familiar hum filled the room. But this time, my brother's voice didn't come immediately. Instead, I heard faint rustling sounds as though someone were adjusting the microphone on the other end. Then, very quietly, my brother spoke my name. His voice was steady, but there was fear beneath it, a fear he was trying hard to conceal. They're inside the house. The doorknob kept turning with an unnatural slowness, not like someone trying to open a door, but like something testing the idea of rotation for the first time and enjoying how the mechanism responded beneath its grip.
I could hear the faint metal clicks as the internal latch shifted back and forth, as though the creature was memorizing the sound patterns of every tiny part. I pressed my back flat against the wall, forcing myself not to breathe, not to tremble, not to betray a single vibration that might travel through the floorboards. The house felt painfully awake, every object around me holding its own breath, listening with me. After a long stretching moment, the doorknob stopped halfway between locked and open, and that stillness was somehow worse than movement. Then the creature exhaled. It was not a human breath. It had weight, but no warmth, like air pushed through a hollow reed, bending oddly at the edges. It let out that strange breath right against the doorframe, as if smelling the wood to confirm my scent was still behind it. I felt a pulse of cold creep under the door, not wind, not temperature, but a presence pressing against the gap as if it was trying to seep through. For a heartbeat, I truly believed it could. A faint scraping sound began near the base of the door, rhythmic and experimental, like a fingernail dragging slowly across the panel to test how the material reacted. Each scrape vibrated through the floor into my bones. I remembered my brother's warning not to make a pattern, not to breathe in a rhythm. So I forced every inhale to be uneven, each exhale delayed, broken, irregular. It hurt. My chest burned. I fought against the primal urge to gasp. The scraping rose a few inches, then moved sideways, then up again, mapping the grain of the wood as if the creature was trying to understand why this thin barrier separated us. It was learning. Every sound I didn't make, every sound the house did, every vibration through the hinges, it was absorbing all of it. Then, abruptly, the creature spoke again. Still using my voice, but now it had learned my cadence too. It reproduced my tone, my hesitation, even the way my breath caught in the back of my throat when I was afraid. It whispered the words, "I'm scared, let me in." And hearing myself say something I had never said, never would say, made something inside me twist with a terror so sharp it felt like a wound. The creature was not asking, it was practicing. The radio stayed silent, offering no guidance, no warning, leaving me alone with the thing outside. Slowly, the mimicry faded, and the creature began producing a low, pulsing hum. It started as a faint vibration, almost like the distant thrum of a refrigerator motor, but it grew deeper, resonating through the entire doorframe, like it was testing how sound traveled through the material. That hum crawled into my teeth, made the air quiver inside my chest. It was learning resonance. The doorknob twitched again, this time with more confidence, and when it turned halfway once more, it didn't immediately stop. It held there, firm and calculated, as though the creature was waiting for a sound from me, waiting for a mistake, waiting for the one piece of information it hadn't learned yet. My heart beat. And then to my horror, the hum shifted, slowly, deliberately, until it matched the rhythm of my pulse, as if it could feel the vibrations through the door. Every throb of my heart was echoed, repeated, mirrored by the thing on the other side, and the synchronization felt like a handshake, like an introduction, like the creature had finally learned something it had been trying to understand since it entered my home. It knew me. And when it finally stopped humming, its silence was so sudden and clean that I knew it had found what it needed. A moment later, the creature whispered in a voice that was no longer mine, no longer my brother's, no longer anything human at all.
I sat in silence, staring at the radio as my brother's voice drifted through the static again, repeating the same warning but softer this time, as if he was afraid something else might hear him. He told me not to make a sound because something was inside the house. For a second, I tried convincing myself I was hallucinating, but then a quiet movement downstairs broke the lie. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't dragging.
It was the subtle shifting of weight against furniture, like something unfamiliar with a home was learning its shape by touch. I held my breath as a faint tapping of nails brushed across the wooden floor, delicate and curious, as though the intruder was studying the texture of everything it encountered. My brother's voice returned, urgent and trembling, telling me they weren't hunting me yet because they didn't understand what I was. If they heard me, he said, they would begin learning, and once they learned my sound, they would never stop searching. The noise downstairs halted so suddenly it felt deliberate, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. Then a single sharp tap echoed from the bottom of the staircase. 3 seconds passed. Another tap. 3 more seconds. Another. The pattern was impossibly precise, like a metronome someone had taught to climb stairs. The tappings grew louder as they ascended, each strike steady and identical. Not footsteps, but an imitation of footsteps by something that didn't quite understand the idea of walking. When the tapping reached the top and stopped outside my bedroom door, my brother whispered that it was copying my heartbeat. My pulse slammed against my chest so loudly I was sure it could hear it. The rhythm of the taps tightened, adjusting to the frantic beat inside me, as if the thing was learning my body from the other side of the door. The house went still again before the doorknob twitched with a tiny metallic tremor, a clumsy attempt by something trying to understand how doors worked. My brother urged me to stay completely still because the creature didn't know how to open things yet, and any sound could teach it. The tapping resumed, this time directly against the door itself, traveling slowly along the surface, tracing the edges, feeling the shape, calculating whatever it needed to know. Then, in a sudden chilling shift, the creature used my own voice, perfectly mimicking the wavering tone I had used earlier that night, and asked me to open the door. It didn't sound curious anymore. It sounded sure of itself, like it had finally grasped the idea it had been trying to learn. My brother's voice cut through the static with fear I had never heard from him before, as he warned me not to respond, because the creature remembered everything I had ever said. The radio sputtered violently and then went dead, leaving me in absolute silence. The thing outside didn't move away. It didn't tap. It simply stood there, with a presence so heavy it felt like a second heartbeat pressed against the wood. Then slowly, with terrifying patience, the doorknob began to turn again. I waited for the sound of footsteps moving down the hallway, for some sign that the creature had lost interest in me, but the house remained unnervingly silent, as if every sound had been swallowed by something patient and listening. That single step it had taken was the last noise it offered, and what terrified me most was realizing it didn't need to move to advance. Sometimes learning was enough. I stayed pressed against the wall, barely breathing, feeling the cold weight of its awareness lingering just beyond the door. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Time stretched thin and distorted in the dark. Then something shifted in the radio shell, a faint crackle like air being pulled backward through old wires, and for an instant I thought my brother would speak again, but the radio stayed muted, as if it too were afraid. A sudden soft thud came from the far end of the hallway, not loud but unmistakable, like a hand gently brushing against the wall for balance. It wasn't walking away from me. It was tracing the corridor, learning the house the same way it had mapped my door. Every tiny noise, every subtle movement felt calculated, like the creature had no wasted gestures. Another gentle thud followed, then a faint dragging sound. Not the heavy drag of a body, but something thin and agile, skimming lightly along the wallpaper. It paused near the guest room, and for a moment I heard what sounded like fingers tapping against a picture frame, exploring its edges, testing its weight. The taps were no longer random. They had a rhythm now, smooth and deliberate, like someone who had learned how to properly knock. The creature moved again, gliding toward the living room with frightening patience. I could track its path through the faint vibrations in the floorboards,
each one subtle but intentional. When it reached the staircase, the house responded with a soft groan, and the creature halted, as if analyzing the sound. I could almost feel its attention shifting, not toward the stairs, but to something else, something outside. A thin, warbling whistle drifted through the night air, not from the creature, but from the world beyond the windows, carried by the wind. The house wasn't the only thing awake. The creature reacted instantly. The air in the hallway tensed. The vibrations stopped, and I sensed it turn toward the front door with a sudden sharp awareness, as if something had called to it. The whistle came again, a faint rising tone that reminded me of the static patterns I had heard on the radio nights before, the ones my brother insisted weren't weather noise. The creature answered with a soft, resonant pulse, the same frequency it had used to mimic my heartbeat, but stretched longer, steadier, like a response signal. The whistle outside faded, replaced by a deep stillness. The creature waited. I did too. Then the front door hinges released a small metallic sigh, the kind they only make when pressure is applied but not quite enough to open. My chest tightened. The creature wasn't leaving. It was expecting something. Another vibration traveled through the frame, too soft to be called a knock, more like a coded message between two things that understood sound better than speech. Whatever was outside responded with a faint shuffle of gravel, stepping closer. I felt the house shrink around me. Something else was coming. The creature in the hallway shifted again, but this time the movement had purpose, direction, readiness. It no longer felt like a wandering presence. It felt like a sentinel answering a signal. The air thickened with the tension of something approaching the door, and every instinct in me screamed to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't risk making the smallest sound. A long, stretched silence took hold, the kind that comes right before a decision is made. Then, from outside, a single deliberate knock echoed through the door. Not human, not curious, a greeting. Inside the hallway, the creature answered with a soft, perfect imitation of my voice. Come in. And the front door lock clicked.
The click of the front door lock echoed through the house like a decision I had never agreed to. I felt the sound more than heard it, a tiny metallic shift that rippled through my chest and tightened around my spine. Something outside pushed gently against the door, not forcing it open, but applying a slow, patient pressure as if testing how much resistance it needed to overcome. The creature in the hallway stayed perfectly still, not moving toward the entrance, not moving away, simply waiting, as though the house itself had entered a moment of breathless anticipation. I could feel the air in the walls tighten, as if the entire structure understood what was about to enter. The pressure on the front door grew firmer, and the hinges gave a soft groan that sounded almost pained. Then, with a quiet sigh, the door eased open by only a few inches, just enough for the cold night air to spill inside. I expected wind, rain, anything familiar, but the air that entered felt hollow, as if it had passed through something empty on its way in. A faint rustle followed, not footsteps, but more like fabric brushing against a surface without the weight of a body inside it. Whatever was outside stepped over the threshold, and I felt the floorboards react with a soft, unsettled creak, the way a house shivers when it recognizes something that doesn't belong. The creature in the hallway replied with another sound in my voice, quiet and gentle, almost welcoming, but underneath it was a resonance I recognized, the same tone it used when it was learning. The thing that entered the house responded with a faint echo of that sound, as though repeating it for confirmation. They were communicating. They were aligning. The soft rustle moved deeper into the living room, gliding rather than walking, and the faint impression of movement passed through the air like a cold hand brushing across the back of my neck. I didn't know what shape it had or if it even had a shape, but whatever entered seemed to understand the creature inside the hallway the way the creature understood me. For a terrifying moment, everything fell silent,
and the house felt suspended in a fragile, unnatural balance. Then the new presence made a sound that didn't belong to any living throat, a low, echoing vibration that reminded me of someone blowing across the mouth of an empty bottle, stretched thin and distorted until it felt like it was circling the room instead of coming from a single point. The creature in the hallway responded with a pulse of the same frequency, but stronger, clearer, more refined. It felt like they were matching signals, tuning themselves to each other, aligning the way instruments are tuned before a performance. The vibrations deepened, and my bones quivered with the frequency. The radio on my nightstand remained dead, but emitted a faint metallic buzzing, reacting not by choice, but by force, like something inside it remembered how to wake but was being held down. The buzzing grew, trembling through the wires, and I stared at it in dread as the dial twitched ever so slightly, like a lid rattling from pressure underneath. The two creatures continued their silent, rhythmic exchange of vibrations, each tone sinking deeper into the structure of the house until the walls themselves seemed to breathe. Then, in the middle of their alignment, the sound shifted. Not gradually, not gently, abruptly. The creature outside released a tone that didn't match the pattern, a deeper, more urgent frequency that shook dust from the beams above me. The hallway creature froze. For the first time since it entered my home, I sensed hesitation. The outside presence repeated the tone, stronger, sharper, and the thing in my hallway responded with a delayed, uncertain hum. It wasn't a greeting anymore. It was a warning. The energy between them thickened, vibrating the glass in the windows, warping the soft shadows into trembling shapes. My breath caught in my throat as another pulse rolled through the house, this one so intense it felt like someone had struck the foundation with a tuning fork the size of a tree. The creature in the hallway reacted instantly, releasing a violent, cracking frequency that made my teeth ache and the floorboards buckle slightly beneath my feet. The front door slammed shut, on its own. The two sounds collided in the middle of the house, folding into each other, grinding, overwhelming, until something in the wooden frame let out a deep, agonized creak. The outside presence retreated a few feet, not in fear, but in recalibration. The hallway creature held its ground, its hum steadying, sharpening, shifting from learning to defending. And then the radio snapped on with a burst of static so loud it felt like it erupted inside my skull. My brother's voice cut through the chaos, raw and panicked, shouting words I could barely understand through the distortion. "Don't come out! It's not here for you! It's here for it!" The message warped, twisted, and then he screamed, "It followed you home!" The radio shut off, and the creature outside stepped back toward the door.
The creature outside the door stepped closer again, its movement so measured and deliberate that the house seemed to brace against it, as if every nail and board knew what was about to return. The thing in my hallway lowered its frequency, almost like a breath before a confrontation, and the air between them tightened with a tension that scraped along my skin. I didn't understand the exchange of sounds, but I could feel the intention behind them. The outside presence wasn't trying to enter quietly anymore. It wanted in the way a storm wants to break a window, not out of curiosity, but inevitability. A deep vibration rolled under the floorboards, moving through the house like a ripple across water. It passed beneath my feet, traveled up the walls, and gathered above me in the ceiling like static building before a lightning strike. The outside creature responded with a sharp, rising tone that made the windows rattle in their frames. The hallway creature answered with a lower pulse, slower and heavier, like a warning thud against a locked door. The two sounds collided once again, but this time more violently, and the pressure pushed the air out of my lungs in a single forced gasp I couldn't control. My reaction was a mistake. A small one, but enough. The sound I made traveled through the floor, thin but detectable, a quiver that betrayed the exact location of my heartbeat. The hallway creature froze. Its attention shifted, not fully, but enough for the outside presence to react first. A rapid vibration surged through the front door, a fluttering pulse that felt like fingers drumming impossibly fast against the wood. It wasn't knocking. It was scanning.
reading, locating. It had heard me. The hallway creature emitted a sharp, dissonant crack that made the lights flicker even though they weren't turned on. The two creatures exchanged a rapid volley of frequencies, faster now, harsher, each trying to overpower the other. The house groaned like it was being forced to stretch. Dust drifted from the corners. The radio trembled on the nightstand, shaking in small, frantic tremors as if something inside was trying to escape its shell. A high-pitched keening began from somewhere deep in the walls, not from pipes or wiring, but from the structure itself, the way metal cries when bent past its limit. Then, in the middle of the chaos, the outside presence went silent. Not fading, not retreating, just stopping. The stillness that followed felt like a vacuum, like the world had been muted. The hallway creature paused too, its frequency tapering off into a cautious hum. The silence stretched on, long enough that my pulse felt deafening to me, like a drumbeat echoing through a crypt. Slowly, carefully, the creature in my hallway moved back toward my bedroom door, its approach so quiet I only sensed it through the faint trembling in the wood. It stopped right outside, not touching the doorknob this time, not tapping or scraping, just standing there with its attention fixed on me. For a moment, I thought it was trying to decide whether I was worth protecting or exposing. Then the outside presence broke the silence with a single sound, a long, low moan that didn't resemble anything human or animal, a sound so ancient and mournful it felt like the wail of something buried for centuries. The walls absorbed the vibration, trembling under the weight of it, and the hallway creature responded with a harsh pulse, louder and sharper than before. The moan outside deepened, and for the first time I sensed emotion in it. Not anger, but recognition. Not of the hallway creature, of me. Footsteps began outside the house. Multiple sets. Soft, almost whisper-light steps circling the walls, pressing their weight gently against the siding, moving toward every window, every corner, every crack where sound could pass. The creatures outside weren't trying to break in. They were surrounding the house. The hallway creature pressed itself closer to my door, its attention split between me and the presence gathering outside. I could feel its hesitation, its uncertainty, as if it had not expected to be found, as if the thing outside the house wasn't a visitor, but a pursuer. A soft whisper filtered through the radio's dead speakers, faint and broken, like a voice bleeding through a paper-thin wall. Don't answer them. My brother's voice was barely audible, shredded with static, but the warning was unmistakable. The outside creatures began humming in unison. Not to each other, to me. A melody formed in their combined vibrations, slow, rising, coaxing, a sound designed to be followed, not feared. The hallway creature stiffened, and something in me, deep and instinctive, wanted to open the door.
The melody outside pulled at something primal inside my chest, like a distant memory I never knew I had. Something older than my own thoughts, older than language itself. The voices weren't calling me by name, but the way the sound folded into itself made it feel like they were shaping the rhythm of my heartbeat, coaxing it into alignment with theirs. My fingers twitched against the floor, as if my body wanted to respond before my mind could stop it. The hallway creature reacted instantly, releasing a sharp, discordant pulse that sliced through the melody like a blade. The sound made my skull throb, but it snapped that strange pull inside me, like a wire being cut. For a moment, I could think again. But the voices outside only grew more insistent. The melody shifted, bending into a softer tone, almost affectionate, as if trying to override the hallway creature's warning. The walls shivered under the weight of their harmonizing hum, and the faint flutter of movement brushed along the siding of the house. They were close, too close, pressing their shapes against the walls as if listening for the rhythm of my breath through the wood. I tried to control my breathing, keep it uneven the way my brother had told me to, but the melody made it almost impossible. My lungs wanted to match their tune. My pulse wanted to fall into step with theirs. My body betrayed me with a trembling exhale. A chorus of soft, delighted hums answered immediately. The hallway creature struck the floor with a jarring pulse that traveled straight up my legs, grounding me in place with a shock of cold clarity. It wasn't protecting me out of kindness, I realized. It was defending what it had learned. To the creatures outside, I was a beacon. To the creature inside, I was information. And both sides wanted something different from me. The humming outside stopped all at once, cut clean as if someone had severed the thread of sound. The sudden silence pressed against the windows like a hand flattening against glass. I felt the house's frame bow inward slightly, as if multiple bodies had leaned against it at the same time. A faint crack spread along the paint near the baseboard, small but deliberate. The hallway creature responded with a slow, rising hum. Not aggressive this time, but warning. A sound telling the outside presence that it would not give me up easily. The outside chorus replied with a long, deep vibration that rolled across the entire house like thunder traveling underground. The floor shook softly beneath me. A picture frame fell somewhere in the living room with the tiniest clatter. And then the radio flickered alive with a burst of static, so violent it hurt my ears. My brother's voice pushed through the distortion with a desperation I had never heard before. "Don't let them in! Don't listen! Don't follow the song!" His voice cut out mid-sentence, as if something had yanked the signal away. I leaned forward instinctively, unable to stop myself, straining to hear even a fragment of him, anything that sounded like guidance. But instead of his voice, a faint whisper rose behind the static, too soft to fully understand, but close enough that it felt like it was leaning directly into my ear. "He can't reach you anymore." I jerked backward as if someone had brushed my neck. The whisper didn't repeat. Instead, the outside creature shifted again, their vibrations tightening into a new pattern, one slower, more patient, more focused. Not a melody this time, a countdown. A steady low pulse that repeated at exact intervals, each one slightly louder than the last. The hallway creature responded with a frantic flickering hum that jumped in pitch, no longer confident, no longer in control. It wasn't warning me now. It was afraid. The pulse outside grew closer, pressing through the walls like a sonar wave, measuring the distance between us with cold precision. The creature in the hallway backed away from my door for the first time, its movement hesitant and unsteady, as if it knew the countdown wasn't for me. It was for it. A soft crack splintered through the living room, the sound of wood bending under some enormous but invisible weight. Another followed, then another, like the house's ribs were being slowly pried apart. I felt the air pressure shift in the hallway as something pushed against the front wall of the house, not trying to enter gently anymore, but pressing with the confidence of something that had waited long enough. The countdown outside reached its final pulse. The hallway creature released a single sharp sound, high, thin, almost frightened, before retreating deeper down the corridor. And then, all at once, the wall near the front door bowed inward with a loud, cracking snap as something enormous and determined pressed its way through the house. The outside creatures had stopped asking. They were coming in. I didn't turn around. I didn't dare. The footsteps behind me were slow, deliberate, and far too familiar, as if someone was matching their pace to the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I kept my eyes on the radio lying in the dust near the broken bench, its static cracking open like thin ice, whispering fragments of a voice that was trying to break through. For a moment, everything around me felt stretched, like time itself was pulling taut and thinning until it was about to rip. The air tasted cold, metallic, and had clung to the inside of my throat like frost. Then I heard it, a soft exhale behind me, a breath I had heard 1,000 times in my childhood, a breath that belonged to someone who should not be here, someone who should not be anywhere. The radio whispered, "Don't turn around."
But the voice wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It felt like the radio had become a mouth pressed against my ear, its words crawling under my skin. The voice continued, trembling with a mix of longing and warning. It sounded exactly like my brother, not distorted, not warped, just him, alive, breathing, standing inches behind me. My own breath shook loose from my chest, and I whispered his name, barely, quietly, like saying it too loudly might shatter something I wasn't ready to face. The footsteps stopped, the breathing stopped, the entire station seemed to stop. Then the radio crackled again, cutting through the stillness like a blade. It urged, the tone sharp now, urgent, almost panicked. Leave, before it... The transmission broke off, swallowed by a low vibrating hum that rose from the floorboards beneath my shoes. I felt the ground tremble as if something large was moving beneath it, dragging itself closer, drawn to the sound of my voice, or my fear, or maybe the radio itself. I finally forced myself to step back, just one small step, and the moment my foot touched the gravel, the breathing behind me returned, louder, uneven, and no longer human. The shape of the sound had changed. It scraped, it hissed, it rattled inside the hollow space of my spine. The radio flared with one final surge of static, and the voice, my brother's voice, broke through in a raw, desperate plea. "Run."
I didn't hesitate this time. The moment that single word tore through the speaker, I felt something deep inside me snap loose, something primitive and urgent that screamed at me to move before whatever was behind me decided to show its face. I ran without looking back, my footsteps slamming against the gravel as the darkness behind me rippled like something heavy was dragging itself through it. The air felt thick, almost elastic, stretching against me as if the station itself didn't want me to leave. Every breath scraped at my lungs, cold enough to burn, but I kept pushing forward, guided only by the faint glow of the radio in my hand. The static pulsed like a heartbeat, rising and falling in frantic bursts, as if the voice inside it was running with me, urging me faster. Behind me, the breathing grew louder, not steady, not rhythmic, but jagged, hungry, stitched together with sounds no living throat could make. It was close, too close, close enough that I could feel the air shift when it lunged in my direction, grazing the emptiness just inches from my back. I stumbled, but didn't fall, forcing myself forward even as my legs threatened to buckle. The entrance to the station flickered in and out of my vision like a mirage, bending in the darkness, stretching away from me with every step I took. It felt wrong, impossible, as if the place was reshaping itself to keep me inside. Then the radio erupted with a piercing shriek, a burst of noise so sharp it felt like it split the air open. The sound hit whatever was behind me. I heard it recoil, a guttural snarl scraping through the dark, retreating just enough to give me a second's advantage. I used it. I hurled myself forward and finally broke through the veil of cold that clung to the station platform. My feet hit open ground, and the air changed instantly, warmer, thinner, real. I didn't stop moving until I reached the rusted gate at the edge of the property, collapsing against it as the radio buzzed weakly in my hand. For a moment, everything was silent, except for my own shaking breaths. Then the radio crackled again, softer now, almost tired. "You weren't supposed to stay. You weren't supposed to hear what comes next." The transmission faded into a slow, steady hum, like something waiting, like it wasn't finished.
I pressed the radio against my chest, trying to steady my breathing as the hum inside it grew softer, almost comfortingly soft, like a heartbeat weakening after a long struggle. For the first time since the broadcast began, I realized my hands were trembling so violently that the dial on the radio kept slipping beneath my fingers. I whispered my brother's name again, not as a plea this time, but as a question the night didn't seem willing to answer. The wind moved through the empty fields around the station, carrying a coldness that didn't belong to the world outside, a coldness that felt like it had seeped out of that abandoned platform and followed me into the open. I told myself it was just the adrenaline, just the shock, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had crossed the boundary when I did. Something had followed. The radio sputtered as if clearing its throat, then a faint whisper bled through the static. "I told you to run sooner." The voice was my brother's, but it sounded thinner now, stretched across a distance too wide to measure. I felt my stomach drop. He wasn't relieved that I escaped. He sounded disappointed, afraid, as if my leaving had triggered something worse. I wanted to ask him what that meant, but before I could speak, the radio interrupted me with a clicking sound, rhythmic and steady, like someone tapping their nails on a wooden table. Between the taps, I thought I heard another breath, not behind me this time, but inside the speaker itself, as if the boundary between the broadcast and the world was dissolving. I tightened my grip and forced myself to walk toward the narrow road leading back home. Every few steps, the tapping grew louder, more insistent, echoing inside the metal casing like a warning I wasn't deciphering fast enough. Then the voice returned, weaker now, but deliberate. "Don't go home." I froze in the middle of the road, my pulse thundering in my ears. The radio continued, each word a strained whisper fighting through layers of interference. "It knows where you live." My chest tightened so sharply it hurt, and I looked back toward the direction of the station even though I promised myself I wouldn't. The darkness beyond the gate had thickened, gathering like a storm cloud, shifting in a way shadows shouldn't shift. I felt it watching. The radio crackled once more, and his voice, my brother's voice, delivered the last words in a tone that sounded too final, too resigned. "You brought it with you." I didn't move for a long moment. The road ahead of me looked impossibly long, stretched thin under the pale moonlight, and every instinct I had screamed that taking another step would be a mistake I couldn't undo. The radio felt heavier now, as if something inside it had shifted, settling into place like a heartbeat aligning with mine. I forced myself to walk again, slowly at first, listening for anything that didn't belong to the night. The fields on either side of the road were silent, but not empty. I could feel it in the air, a pressure, a presence, something pacing the edges of my awareness like a predator testing the limits of its leash. The tapping inside the radio resumed. I didn't move for a long moment. The road ahead of me looked impossibly long, stretched thin under the pale moonlight, and every instinct I had screamed that taking another step would be a mistake I couldn't undo. The radio felt heavier now, as if something inside it had shifted, settling into place like a heartbeat aligning with mine. I forced myself to walk again, slowly at first, listening for anything that didn't belong to the night. The fields on either side of the road were silent, but not empty. I could feel it in the air, a pressure, a presence, something pacing the edges of my awareness like a predator testing the limits of its leash. The tapping inside the radio resumed, softer now, but steady, like a countdown that only I could hear. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked before the words formed.
It didn't matter. The radio answered anyway, as if my fear alone was enough to wake it up. "You shouldn't have stayed past dawn," it whispered. The sentence made no sense. Dawn was still hours away, but the way the voice said it, trembling and strained, made the meaning unmistakable. Something had changed tonight, something irreversible. I felt a coldness crawl up my spine, spreading through my ribs like frost creeping across a window pane. I looked down at the radio and realized the dial had turned on its own, shifting to a frequency I didn't recognize, a frequency I hadn't touched. Static filled the speaker in long, dragging waves, like someone inhaling slowly, deeply, savoring the breath. My brother's voice cut through the noise again, but now it sounded farther away, like he was sinking, being pulled under by something stronger than him. "He's close to you now," he said, barely audible. "Don't stop walking. Whatever happens, don't—" The message sliced off mid-sentence. Not faded, not distorted. Cut, like someone had forced his voice into silence. My footsteps quickened without my permission, carrying me farther down the road. The shadows along the fields pressed inward, bending as if something enormous was moving through them without making a sound. I could feel its attention tightening around me, drawing closer the farther I went. Then the radio let out a low, resonant hum, so deep it vibrated through my bones. For a moment the world around me felt like it had tilted, as if I were walking on the edge of a place that wasn't meant for the living. The hum grew louder, building pressure inside my skull until I thought it would crack me open from the inside. Just before the sound became unbearable, the voice returned. Not my brother's this time, but something else, something older, something patient. It spoke only one sentence, and the moment I heard it, my knees nearly gave out. "You are not meant to escape."
The word threshold clung to me long after the whisper faded, heavy and suffocating, like someone had draped a cold, damp cloth over my entire body. I didn't understand what it meant, not fully, but the air around me shifted the moment I heard it. The night seemed to grow thicker, as if I had stepped into a version of the world that wasn't meant to be walked by the living. The road beneath my feet felt different now, softer in places, unsteady, like the ground wasn't ground at all, but something pretending to be. I tried to keep my breathing quiet, steady, but every inhale felt too loud, too exposed, as if something unseen was listening closely to the rhythm of my lungs. The radio remained silent for a long stretch of my walk, humming faintly, like it was thinking, calculating, adjusting to whatever place I had wandered into. I held it close, even though part of me hated touching it, hated the warmth that occasionally pulsed through its metal frame like a living heartbeat. It wasn't just a device anymore. I could feel that now. It was a doorway, or a leash, or maybe both. Finally, the hum shifted, turning sharp at the edges like a blade being sharpened. Then a voice broke through, my brother's voice, thin, ragged, strangled with panic. "Don't let it talk to you," he gasped, as if every word cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. "It lies, it binds, it—" His voice fractured, dissolving into static so violent it stabbed through the speaker like broken glass. I pressed the radio against my ear, desperate for even a scrap of his voice, but the static only grew louder, rising in waves that made my vision blur. Somewhere beneath the noise, I thought I heard him crying, or screaming, or being pulled away. Then the static stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. It ended in an instant, like someone had cut a wire. Silence filled the night again, but it wasn't empty. It felt crowded, like something immense was standing just beyond the edge of my hearing, waiting. The new voice slipped into the silence like oil spreading across still water. "You call for him," it murmured, almost amused. "You've always called for him." The tone wasn't mocking or cruel. It was curious, studying me the way a scientist studies something trapped beneath glass. I swallowed hard, tasting iron and cold and something else I couldn't name. "What do you want?" I whispered, even though I knew I shouldn't ask, even though I knew it would answer. The radio warmed suddenly in my palms, and the voice exhaled softly like it had been waiting for that exact question. To finish what he started. To take what he left behind. I didn't realize I'd stopped walking until the night around me shifted in a subtle, unnatural ripple, like the darkness was displeased by my hesitation. I took a shaky step forward, then another, afraid of what would happen if I stayed still. The voice spoke again, quieter this time, almost tender. "You should have let him go," it whispered. "He tried so hard to keep you out of this." The road stretched ahead of me, endless and dim, and for the first time tonight, I understood something with perfect, terrifying clarity. Whatever had followed me from the station wasn't chasing me out of hunger. It was guiding me, shepherding me, leading me somewhere I had already stepped into without knowing it. Somewhere I might not return from.
The sentence echoed through me long after the voice had gone silent, sinking into my bones like a cold iron weight I couldn't shake off. I stood frozen in the middle of the road, the radio held so tightly in my hands that the metal edges dug into my skin, but I barely felt it. All I could hear was that voice, low and steady with the calmness of something that had been waiting a very long time. I forced my legs to move again, one step, then another, even though each movement felt wrong, like I was walking into a place the world didn't want me to reach. The night around me didn't feel like night anymore. It felt stretched thin, hollow, as if the darkness was no longer the absence of light, but a living thing watching me breathe. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at the shifting corners of the fields where the shadows seemed to pulse in and out like steady breaths. The radio crackled again, softer this time, a thin whisper caught under layers of static. I brought it closer to my ear, hoping, begging for my brother's voice, but what emerged was nothing human. A slow, deliberate exhale filled the speaker, deep and echoing, like wind blowing through a vast, empty space beneath the earth. The sound lingered, curling around my pulse until my heartbeat matched its rhythm. Then a voice followed. Not loud, not aggressive, but close. Too close. A whisper pressed right against the inside of my skull. "You left the station," it said, almost gently. "You shouldn't have left alone." My hands turned cold instantly, and I gripped the radio tighter as if that could protect me from a voice that didn't need distance to reach me. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. My throat felt sealed shut, filled with a fear too thick to swallow. The voice continued, unfazed by my silence. "It was waiting for you," it murmured, "following you, learning you."
Each word slid slowly into the air, as if choosing the perfect place to land inside my mind. I could feel something behind me then, not breathing, not moving, but present, as if the air had gathered itself into a shape that didn't belong. The hairs on my neck rose, prickling with an instinct older than memory, an instinct that told me not to turn around no matter how much I wanted to. The radio buzzed with another burst of static, and for a moment I thought I heard my brother again, faint and frantic, trying to break through whatever held him back. But before I could make sense of it, the deeper voice drowned him out with a single, deliberate command. Keep walking. The way it said it made my stomach twist. Not because it sounded threatening, but because it sounded certain. Certain that I would obey. Certain that it controlled the path in front of me as much as the darkness behind. So I walked, trembling, clutching the radio like it was the last familiar thing in a world slowly unraveling around me. And as I moved down that endless stretch of road, the voice inside the speaker whispered again. Quieter this time, but unmistakably pleased. You've already crossed the threshold.
The word threshold clung to me long after the whisper faded, heavy and suffocating, like someone had draped a cold, damp cloth over my entire body. I didn't understand what it meant, not fully, but the air around me shifted the moment I heard it. The night seemed to grow thicker, as if I had stepped into a version of the world that wasn't meant to be walked by the living. The road beneath my feet felt different now, softer in places, unsteady, like the ground wasn't ground at all, but something pretending to be. I tried to keep my breathing quiet, steady, but every inhale felt too loud, too exposed, as if something unseen was listening closely to the rhythm of my lungs. The radio remained silent for a long stretch of my walk, humming faintly, like it was thinking, calculating, adjusting to whatever place I had wandered into. I held it close, even though part of me hated touching it, hated the warmth that occasionally pulsed through its metal frame like a living heartbeat. It wasn't just a device anymore. I could feel that now. It was a doorway, or a leash, or maybe both. Finally, the hum shifted, turning sharp at the edges like a blade being sharpened. Then a voice broke through, my brother's voice, thin, ragged, strangled with panic. "Don't let it talk to you," he gasped, as if every word cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. "It lies, it binds, it—" His voice fractured, dissolving into static so violent it stabbed through the speaker like broken glass. I pressed the radio against my ear, desperate for even a scrap of his voice, but the static only grew louder, rising in waves that made my vision blur. Somewhere beneath the noise, I thought I heard him crying, or screaming, or being pulled away. Then the static stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. It ended in an instant, like someone had cut a wire. Silence filled the night again, but it wasn't empty. It felt crowded, like something immense was standing just beyond the edge of my hearing, waiting. The new voice slipped into the silence like oil spreading across still water. "You call for him," it murmured, almost amused. "You've always called for him." The tone wasn't mocking or cruel. It was curious, studying me the way a scientist studies something trapped beneath glass. I swallowed hard, tasting iron and cold and something else I couldn't name. "What do you want?" I whispered, even though I knew I shouldn't ask, even though I knew it would answer. The radio warmed suddenly in my palms, and the voice exhaled softly like it had been waiting for that exact question. To finish what he started. To take what he left behind. I didn't realize I'd stopped walking until the night around me shifted in a subtle, unnatural ripple, like the darkness was displeased by my hesitation. I took a shaky step forward, then another, afraid of what would happen if I stayed still. The voice spoke again, quieter this time, almost tender. "You should have let him go," it whispered. "He tried so hard to keep you out of this." The road stretched ahead of me, endless and dim, and for the first time tonight, I understood something with perfect, terrifying clarity. Whatever had followed me from the station wasn't chasing me out of hunger. It was guiding me, shepherding me, leading me somewhere I had already stepped into without knowing it. Somewhere I might not return from. I felt the truth settle into me slowly, like cold water rising past my ankles, creeping higher with every breath. The road ahead wasn't leading me home anymore. It was pulling me deeper, drawing me toward a place the world didn't map, a place my brother had stumbled into long before I did. Maybe he had tried to warn me years ago. Maybe every disappearance leaves an echo, and mine had finally answered his. The radio vibrated subtly in my hands, as if reacting to a change in the air. The darkness around me thickened in response, curling inward, closing the distance between me and the thing I had unknowingly been following. I could feel it now, not behind me, not beside me, but all around me, like the night itself had grown aware. My brother's voice burst through the static again, but this time it didn't sound like him at all. It was warped, shredded at the edges, held together by sheer desperation. "Turn back," he pleaded. "Please, you're too close." The words trembled, trembling the way a rope does when something is pulling it from both sides. I whispered his name again, afraid that saying it too loudly might break whatever thin connection remained between us. Before I could ask him where to go, how to escape, the deeper voice cut him off with a sharp crackle that felt like a door slamming in my ear. Its tone shifted, no longer curious, no longer patient. Now it sounded hungry. "It cannot guide you. He never understood the path." The radio warmed in my hands again, too warm, almost burning, but I didn't drop it. Some instinct kept me clutching it, as if letting it go would sever something vital inside me. The hum returned, low, rhythmic, pulsing through the night, like the heartbeat of the land beneath my feet. I realized then that the road wasn't changing. I was. Every step made me lighter, in a way that terrified me, as if the weight of my body was slipping away, as if the world I knew was loosening its grip. The voice continued, calm again now, steady. It feared what it heard. "You were always meant to listen." The words made something inside my chest throb painfully, a memory surfacing with sudden clarity. My brother, years ago, warning me never to touch the radio in our grandfather's attic. I hadn't understood why he was so frightened. I hadn't understood why he kept it hidden. Now I did. He wasn't afraid of the radio. He was afraid of what called through it. Afraid it would choose someone else. Afraid it would choose me. The static thinned again, stretching into a long, trembling whisper. "You've heard too much. You've crossed too far." The air tightened around me, pressing against my ribs like unseen hands. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, to fight, to throw the radio away and disappear into the night. But my legs felt anchored, held by something stronger. Then the voice lowered to a near silent murmur,
a cold breath brushing across the inside of my mind. You are ready. The moment those words touched me, the darkness around the road shifted, opening not outward, but downward, as if the world beneath my feet had begun to split. Somewhere far behind the layers of static, my brother screamed, a raw, broken sound that pierced through every whisper and hum. But his voice was already fading, already slipping away, and the radio whispered one final sentence, soft and absolute. It's time to follow.
The moment the voice said, "Follow," the road beneath me shifted again, not physically, but in feeling. Like gravity had quietly turned its head in another direction and decided I should lean that way too. I tried to plant my feet, to hold on to the last threads of the world I knew, but the air tugged at me with a pull that wasn't force, but invitation. The kind of invitation you feel in your bones long before you understand it. The radio pulsed with heat, a slow, steady warmth that spread up my arms and into my chest until it felt like something inside me was resonating with it. The static inside the speaker rose and fell in a rhythm too deliberate to be noise, almost like breathing. Not mine, not my brother's, but something vast and ancient settling its voice into me. My brother's voice flickered through the static, thin and distant, like someone calling from the bottom of a deep well. "Don't go," he whispered, but even he sounded unsure now, as if part of him knew it was already too late. Each word was swallowed by the hum growing steadily louder, the way an ocean swallows a single drop of water. I took another step without meaning to, as if the ground moved beneath me rather than the other way around. The darkness thickened in front of me, not like a wall, but like a curtain waiting to be pulled aside. The sound from the radio shifted, deepened, and settled into a single tone that throned inside my ribs. I felt my heartbeat sync with it, first unsteadily, then perfectly, as though the frequency had reached into my chest and rearranged something vital. A cold realization slid through me. I wasn't listening to the radio anymore. I was becoming a part of it. The deeper voice returned, smooth and patient. You hear it now, not as noise, as truth. Its presence inside the speaker felt too large for the small metal casing, as if it were speaking through it was an inconvenience, as if it was preparing to step out of it entirely. I whispered my brother's name again, softer, weaker, less certain than ever. And the voice answered with a quiet sigh. He cannot follow where you go. He was only the beginning. A door must open before it can choose. A chill crawled through my spine as the meaning sank in. He hadn't been the target. He had been the invitation, the warm-up, the warning, the sacrifice. I had always been the one it wanted. And the radio, this heirloom, this relic I thought I inherited by accident, had been waiting for me all along. The static throbbed once, like a pulse. Then the voice murmured, almost affectionately, "Step forward." The road in front of me rippled like heat rising off asphalt, except it wasn't warm. It was impossibly cold, radiating a chill that seeped into my bones the moment I looked at it. The darkness ahead wasn't empty. It was open, like the entrance to something deep, something endless, something alive. My brother's voice broke through one last time, raw and terrified. "Don't follow it!" he screamed. "Don't!" His voice was ripped away mid-sentence, devoured by a crack of static so sharp it felt like it split the night in half. I called out to him, but the sound never left my mouth. The cold swallowed the words before they formed. The deeper voice whispered again, soft and final. "He is gone." The hum around me grew, thickening the air until it vibrated against my skin.
I felt myself leaning forward, pulled toward the shifting darkness waiting for me, just beyond the edge of the world I knew. The radio glowed faintly in my hands, as if it reacting to something on the other side, calling to it, calling to me. And before I could decide whether I was stepping forward or being pulled, the ground beneath me softened, like the earth itself was exhaling. Then, everything went silentless, and the darkness accepted me.
The moment the darkness closed around me, the world I knew folded away like a page turning itself, silent and weightless. There was no ground beneath my feet anymore, but I didn't fall. It felt more like drifting, suspended in a place without direction, without air, without time. The radio was still in my hands, but its shape had changed somehow. The metal felt softer, warmer, almost like skin, pulsing gently as though it shared a heartbeat with something unseen. I tried to breathe, but I couldn't tell if my lungs were actually moving or if the sensation was just a memory my body hadn't let go of yet. Every sound here felt muted and distant, as though the world itself had been wrapped in thick cotton. But underneath that silence, I sensed something enormous circling me with slow, deliberate curiosity. The darkness shifted around me like a tide turning under moonlight, revealing impressions rather than shapes. Faint outlines of places I recognized only by memory. I saw flashes of my childhood home, the backyard where my brother used to hide from thunderstorms, the attic where the radio had first appeared, the train station platform that had swallowed him whole. These glimpses flickered like dying embers, dissolving before I could reach toward any of them. Then the voice returned, not from the radio this time, but from the darkness itself, as if the entire place had taken a breath before speaking. "You crossed the threshold willingly," it said, the words stretching and curling through the air with a calmness that felt ancient. "You followed the calling that was meant for you." I felt a heavy tremor in my chest, a deep ache that wasn't fear alone. It was recognition. The voice wasn't new to me. I had heard it before, not with my ears, but in the quiet moments of childhood when I would wake up suddenly at night, feeling watched by something I couldn't name. My brother must have felt it too. Maybe that's why he was always afraid of the attic, always desperate to keep the radio hidden, always trying to protect me from something he didn't know how to fight. I called out to him again, or tried to, but my voice barely formed in this place. It came out thin, swallowed before it could echo. The darkness shifted again, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw him, just a silhouette, distant, flickering like a candle guttering in the wind. He looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, drained, like someone who had been walking through this place for too long. I reached toward him instinctively, but the silhouette dissolved, replaced by a wave of cold that wrapped around me like an unwelcome embrace. The voice spoke again, lower now, closer, as though it leaned in to whisper directly into the center of my mind. "He came here searching," it said. "He wandered too far. He feared what he heard, and fear is not enough to bind." The meaning sank in slowly, painfully,
My brother hadn't been taken. He had been lost, drifting, unclaimed, resisting whatever this place wanted from him. He had tried to shield me by staying silent, but his silence had become a trail that I had followed. The radio vibrated in my hands again, and I felt something inside it shift, a presence stirring, awakening more fully with every breath I took. You listened without fear, the voice continued. You stepped where he hesitated. You crossed where he turned back. My skin prickled as a realization formed, terrible and complete. I wasn't here to rescue him. I wasn't here to escape. I had been brought here because I matched something this place had been searching for. The darkness pulsed, drawing closer around me like a living wall. You were chosen, it murmured. Not as a warning, not as a witness. The radio grew warmer, nearly scorching, and I felt its pulse blend seamlessly into my own until I could no longer tell which heartbeat belonged to me. You were chosen, the voice repeated, almost tender now, as the one who will continue the calling.
The air around me shifted again, though it wasn't really air, just the closest word my mind could latch onto as the space thickened and thinned with each slow pulse. The darkness no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited, like I had stepped into the lungs of something vast, ancient, and still waking up. The ground, if there even was ground, trembled with a low vibration that crawled up my legs and settled in my spine, urging me forward even though I didn't know where forward was. The radio's glow brightened in my hands, soft at first, then gradually sharpening into a thin, crimson light that cut through the void like a streak of blood. The patterns on its surface shifted again, symbols sliding over each other in slow, deliberate movements, reshaping themselves as though the device was rewriting its own language right in front of me. I could feel it drawing something out of me with every change, a memory, a thought, a breath. The voice returned, though now it seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me in a way that felt almost intimate. "Do you understand what you've accepted?" it asked, not demanding, but patient, like a teacher waiting for a student to realize the answer had always been there. I swallowed hard, or I thought I did. The physical sensations of my body were beginning to blur, losing their distinction. My heartbeat slowed to match the steady rhythm humming from the radio, each beat sinking more tightly than the one before. "I didn't come here to accept anything," I tried to say, though my voice sounded thinner than ever. "I came to find him." The darkness rippled in a movement that felt like a sigh, a gesture of amusement tinged with something close to pity. "He led you here," the voice said gently. "He opened the path for you, even when he feared what waited at the end." I saw another flicker of my brother, clearer this time, close enough that I could finally make out the slope of his shoulders, the familiar shape of his hair, but something was wrong. His outline trembled at the edges, like he wasn't entirely made of substance anymore, as though the place had worn him thin over time. His head was bowed, and he didn't look up even as I whispered his name. I reached for him again, but the radio tightened in my grip, anchoring my hand in place. The voice spoke softly, almost consoling. "He cannot return, not as he was. This place has taken too much, and he has given too little." A weight settled in my chest, colder than fear. "Then let me take him," I said, the words cracking. "Let me carry what he couldn't." The darkness stilled completely, as though listening with genuine curiosity. "You would bear what hollowed him. You would accept what unmade him." My breath caught, but this time not from fear. I understood now. The warm-up, the warning, the sacrifice. My brother was the first two, I had always been the third. "I will," I whispered, though the moment the words left my lips, I wasn't sure if I had spoken them or if the darkness had simply taken them from me before they could form. The void trembled again, not violently, but with a quiet, satisfied certainty. "Then step forward," it said. "Take the role he could not finish." The red light from the radio spilled outward, carving a path in the dark that pulsed with the same rhythm as my slowing heartbeat. The shape of my brother dissolved gently into that glow, fading like a final exhale, leaving only the faintest impression of warmth behind, a warmth I knew would not last. I stepped forward, feeling the shift begin inside me, small at first, then deepening with every movement. The path welcomed me, shaping itself around my presence like an altar adjusting for its offering. The radio vibrated once more, and this time it felt less like a device in my hands and more like a second spine, aligning itself with my own. As the darkness closed around me fully, the voice whispered for the final time, quiet and triumphant, "You are ready."
The moment the voice declared me ready, the darkness thickened until it felt like warm, heavy cloth pressing against my skin. I couldn't see the path anymore, but I could feel it. A subtle pull, like a hand closing gently around my wrist and guiding me forward. Each step carried a strange weight, as if the air itself resisted and then relented, reshaping around me in slow waves. The radio's glow dimmed to a deep, pulsing ember, but its presence inside my mind grew stronger, threading itself into my thoughts with a quiet certainty. I could hear faint echoes now, soft murmurs, distant whispers, layered on top of each other like overlapping memories. Some sounded familiar, pieces of my childhood laughter, my brother's voice calling me from another room, my mother telling us to come inside before it got dark. Others were voices I didn't recognize, stretching far back, carrying the rough texture of lives I had never lived. The effect wasn't frightening. If anything, it felt like being woven into a tapestry far larger than myself. The space around me shifted again, and for a moment I felt as though I was standing on solid ground, real ground, a surface with texture beneath my feet. It felt like cracked cement, cool and lightly dusted with grit, and the scent of old metal brushed past me, faint but unmistakable. The abandoned train station. Even here, where the rules no longer followed the world I understood, the memory of that place lingered like a ghost imprint. A soft click sounded inside the radio, followed by a static breath. The voice returned, though quieter now, almost reverent. "You walk where he walked. You feel what hollowed him. The path recognizes you." I exhaled slowly as understanding settled deeper, not as knowledge, but as intuition. My brother hadn't simply stumbled into this place. He had been preparing, aligning himself with these echoes long before I ever knew the radio existed. He must have heard the transmissions long before I ever knew the radio existed. He must have followed them alone, step by step, until whatever lived here reached back. The darkness ahead brightened again, not with light, but with shape. A figure emerged, wavering gently as though made from drifting smoke. It wasn't my brother this time. This shape was older, taller, with shoulders weighed down by something invisible. Its head tilted slightly, listening to a sound I couldn't hear. For a moment, I thought it might turn toward me, but instead it sunk downward, dissolving into the ground like mist. More shapes followed, not people exactly, impressions of people, the lingering shadows of those who had walked this path long before either of us. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Each one burned faintly with the same crimson glow that pulsed from my radio. Each one moved with purpose, even as they flickered and faded like memories being recalled too late. A shiver ran through me as I realized what I was seeing. These weren't ghosts. They were echoes of every person who'd answered the radio's call. The voice spoke again, closer now, as though whispering directly into the space just behind my ear. He was meant to join them, it murmured. But he resisted. He fought the call, and when dawn came, the path closed on him. A tremor of pain flickered through me, sharp and deep, almost like it belonged to him and was merely passing through me. "Why show me this?" I said softly. "Why bring me here at all?" The darkness vibrated with an answer I didn't immediately understand. To complete the chain. To carry the weight he could not. The radio warmed against my palms, and for the first time I felt a faint tug, not pulling me forward, but inward, as though it was searching inside me for something it had been waiting to awaken. The shapes around me slowed their movements, turning their faceless attention toward the center of the darkness where I stood, as if acknowledging me. I felt the moment shift, subtle but absolute, a silent threshold crossed. My role was no longer a question.
The shift was almost imperceptible at first, like the faint drop in pressure before a storm breaks, but I felt it settle through me with undeniable finality. The darkness around me drew in closer, not suffocating, but enclosing, like a chamber sealing shut to begin some ancient ritual. The silhouettes that drifted in and out of view seemed to pause in unison, every flickering form turning its attention toward me as though sensing the change that had just taken place. Their presence didn't frighten me anymore. It felt expected, almost natural, as if the moment had been waiting for me longer than I had been alive. The radio's pulse steadied into a low throb, sinking with the rhythm in my chest, until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. A warmth spread through my arms, not soothing but purposeful, a quiet strength anchoring itself in my bones. I felt it settle behind my ribs, in the hollow beneath my sternum, in the quiet chambers of my mind. The voice had prepared me for this, though I hadn't understood its meaning until now. A soft rumble unfurled in the dark, like something enormous shifting its weight somewhere beyond sight. The ground beneath me, or whatever surface I had convinced myself I was standing on, trembled lightly, as if responding to a distant command. The faint echoes of old transmissions rose in the air, fragments of numbers, dates, half-spoken warnings, looping softly like lullabies meant for the dead. Each fragment brushed against me like a passing hand, leaving behind a cold trail of memory that did not belong to me. Then the voice returned, not booming or forceful, but deep and resonant, the kind of voice that filled a space effortlessly, as though it was the space itself speaking through sound. "The path has accepted you," it said, with a calmness that felt almost ceremonial. "You stand where he once stood, but you do not falter as he did." The words struck me with a strange mixture of pride and grief. My brother had attempted this journey alone, without guidance, without preparation, following the transmissions blindly. He didn't know what the voice wanted. He didn't know he was supposed to be part of something larger. He had walked these depths as a lost child, not as an heir to the call. And somewhere along the way, dawn had found him, unprepared, unshielded, and unfinished. I felt a sting behind my eyes, but no tears came. This place didn't allow for tears. It allowed only transformation. The ember-like glow from the radio sharpened into a steady beam, rising upward in a straight line until it vanished into the dark above, like a pillar being raised for a ceremony. The light hummed gently, and the silhouettes drifted toward it, hovering just at the edges as though awaiting instruction. The warmth inside my chest tightened once, then expanded outward, merging seamlessly with the beam's rhythm. I realized, with a clarity that settled cold and certain inside me, that the radio was no longer just an object. It was a conduit, one that had chosen me the moment I first heard it speak my name at 12:17 a.m. And now it wasn't just speaking through the darkness, it was speaking through me. The voice lowered, becoming softer but closer, almost touching. "He passed his burden to you," it whispered, "and now you will pass your voice to those who follow." A chill surged through me. "What does that mean?" I asked, though part of me already understood. The transmissions, the coordinates, the warnings. Someone had to guide the next one. Someone had to speak when the clock reached that impossible hour. Someone had to continue the chain. The beam of crimson light narrowed, spiraling downward until it coiled around my hands, around the radio, around the space where my brother's warmth had once been. The shift inside me deepened, and for the first time, I felt the transmissions forming before they were spoken, like lines of a script I didn't write but somehow always knew. The voice breathed one final sentence, soft as the last note of a fading broadcast. "At midnight, you will not listen. You will speak." And in that moment, I finally understood what I had become.
The moment the voice's final words settled into the darkness, something inside me aligned with a slow, deliberate click, a sensation like gears locking into place inside a machine I hadn't realized I was becoming. The pressure around me shifted again, but it no longer felt like a force acting upon me. It felt like something responding to me, adjusting its shape to fit whatever I was turning into. The air pulsed once, twice, and then steadied as though the entire place had exhaled in acceptance. A faint ringing began in my ears, not painful but precise, the kind of tone you hear only in complete silence. It stretched out in a thin, unwavering line that felt like it was being drawn through the center of my skull. As it intensified, the darkness around me thinned, revealing the faintest suggestion of depth, long corridors of shadow extending endlessly in every direction. The silhouettes that had been drifting before now hovered at a respectful distance, their bodies swaying in a slow, synchronized rhythm, like mourners at a ritual they had seen too many times to fear. The radio warmed steadily against my palms, and I watched as its metal casing began to shift once again, the symbols crawling across it with new purpose. They didn't rearrange into language this time. They aligned into something simpler. A single vertical mark, etched in light, pulsing gently, matching the beat of my heart as though the two had permanently fused. Another vibration rolled through the ground. A whisper followed it. Not the voice, something else, something newer. It sounded like a breath being drawn just behind my shoulder, followed by a faint murmur that traced the edges of my name. I turned slowly, not with fear, but with a strange, calm curiosity. The darkness peeled back only enough to reveal a small figure standing a short distance away. It wasn't my brother. It wasn't one of the ancient echoes. It was someone else entirely, a new outline, faint and trembling, as though it had only just stepped onto the path. A chill spread through me, but not because of its presence. It was because I understood what its presence meant. The chain had already begun shifting toward me. I was no longer the one being guided. I was the one about to guide. The figure flickered uncertainly, lifting its head just enough for me to sense the raw confusion radiating from it. It reminded me of myself at the train station on that first night, lost, searching, unaware of the weight waiting beneath the world's surface. My body reacted before my mind fully caught up. The radio buzzed gently, and I felt the words forming in my throat, climbing upward like smoke rising through a chimney. I didn't speak them yet, but I knew exactly what they would be when midnight came. The voice returned, but softer now, distant, as though it was speaking from far beyond the edge of the path. "The cycle continues," it murmured. "When the hour turns, you will open the way for them." The silhouettes around us bowed their heads, a gesture almost reverent. The new figure stepped closer, drawn toward the faint glow radiating from my hands. And with every step it took, I felt the weight of the transmissions shifting fully onto me. The coordinates, the whispers, the warnings my brother had tried to decipher alone. They belonged to me now, not as a burden, but as a duty woven into the marrow of my new form. A sensation like a cold wind passed through my chest, and in its wake came a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade. I would not return, not to my home, not to the world I had left behind. I had crossed too far, accepted too much, become something that could not exist under sunlight anymore. The radio pulsed once, bright and final, and the darkness around me folded inward like curtains drawing closed around a stage. The new figure watched me with wide, uncertain eyes, waiting, listening, trusting without understanding. And deep within me the first transmission rose, unbidden, but unmistakably mine. Dawn would close this place, but midnight would open it again. And when it did, I would be the voice calling through the static.